In 1979, my professional life fundamentally changed when I started my systemic training. And a few years later, I started work in a systemic community mental health clinic called the Marlborough, which was using structural family therapy as its key model. The year before I moved to that clinic, a move that turned out to be an incredibly lucky break in my life, Salvador Minuchin, the key developer of the structural approach, had spent a year in London, and a lot of that time he'd spent clinically working at the Marlborough. And so my clinical colleagues, my team, when I arrived there, were super enthusiastic about the approach. And I learnt it. Look, I probably didn't have much choice. And indeed, in time, I also started teaching structural family therapy. From the beginning, I liked the approach. I liked the fact that it was designed to work with those families who typically don't access therapy, the families of the slums, as Minuchin's first book was entitled. And I liked the fact that the model gave me clarity and certainty. It gave me a language, a set of metaphors for thinking about family structure, boundaries, subsystems, hierarchy, the contours of which could be traced out by observing the repetitive transactional patterns that unfolded before us in sessions. My journey from structural family therapy to solution-focused brief therapy was, look, it wasn't direct. It took in a number of flirtations. The first flirtation was with the Milan model and the work of Boscolo and Cecchin. The next flirtation was with the work of the Ackerman Institute in New York, Peggy Papp and Peggy Penn. And then the work of the Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto, California, from whence it really was a relatively short hop to solution-focused brief therapy, certainly back then. So I arrived at Solution Focus in 1987. Yes, 1987. And solution-focused brief therapy has remained my passion ever since. But like any passion, there can be a price to be paid for loving. And the cost of loving solution focus is that I've had to learn to unlearn so much. I've had to learn not to know anything about anything, apart from about the therapeutic conversation itself and the context within which useful conversations can occur. Indeed, that is all that it is my business to know about. And even that knowing is always provisional and open to change. So all that we allow ourselves to know about in solution focus is how to talk with people in such a way that they end up by reporting a satisfactory outcome. So that's what, if you like, we don't do very much of in solution focus. We don't know very much. But what do we do? And of course, as many of you know, the answer to that is we ask questions. That's the simple bit. But what is the purpose of the questions that we ask? That's the more important question. And what I think that we're doing when we ask people questions is inviting people to shift their attention, to shift their patterns of noticing, and thus perhaps the story that they tell themselves about who they are in relation to those around them, and who they are in relation to those around them, all in the context of what is. So, from a solution point of view, how COVID-19 is impacting on the way that people are constructing and reconstructing their realities, solution focus has no language for, no way of understanding. But the questions that we might ask people at this time, those really are our business. So what are we doing with people who are currently experiencing tough times and finding those times hard to live through? Well, obviously, we are acknowledging people's distress. And there is a lot for people to be distressed by, whether that be a sense of isolation, an enhanced sense of vulnerability, a fear of a future that will be forever changed, and it will, feeling challenged, people feeling challenged to find a way of fitting into a different world that will demand different skills and capacities. People experiencing financial difficulties that may undermine a key part of some people's sense of self, their rugged sense of autonomy and self-sufficiency. And then, of course, we have a younger generation, perhaps coming out of universities and colleges and just beginning to grasp that the opportunities for them will be worse than the opportunities that were available for other luckier generations. And then, of course, there are also the exacerbated pressures of living. Families living in apartments, without gardens perhaps, with children not being able to go to school, and parents having to renegotiate whose work from home gets priority, which of course in the UK and in heterosexual relationships turns out to be a relatively simple question. It's the men. Couples having to find ways of managing a physical closeness that they may not have experienced, or indeed have wished to experience since the early days of their courtship. The delicate balance of intimacy and privacy, closeness and space that they've worked out over many years, thrown out of possibility by lockdown. Adolescents, separated from their peers and spending far more time in the presence of parents or carers than any self-respecting adolescent would wish, and managing it by diving ever deeper into an online world, a solution alternately both welcomed and disapproved of by pressured parents. And then there are people living with pre-existing conditions, claustrophobia or agoraphobia, depression or anxiety, those struggling with drinking, all of which seem to be, certainly for some, exacerbated by the strange lives that we're currently living. So, of course, a sufficient acknowledging of the distress that people are experiencing is the starting point for any conversation. But what then? What do we do next? And there is no one, I think, predetermined pathway in solution focus, merely a range of possibilities. And the challenge for us as therapists is to choose a possibility that fits the person sitting with us. Look, we might shift the time frame. First of all, perhaps, from the present to the future. We might ask, for example, how will you know that you're living through this time in a way that fits with the future that will suit you, that will be just right for you when COVID-19 no longer dominates our lives? And of course, those of you who know our work well will not find it hard to imagine one of us at brief asking, tell me 20 things that you might notice that will tell you that you're living through this time, and so on and so on. Another way of shifting time in this way might be to invite people to step into that post-pandemic future and to look back towards the present, towards today. As you look back from a time, maybe months, maybe even a little longer into the future, when COVID-19 is no longer shaping our daily living, what will you be most pleased to remember about the way you moved through that tough time, when seeing a way forward seemed hard, almost impossible? And we can follow this up with other personal perspective questions. What might you be hoping that those closest to you might have noticed about you during the time of COVID-19 that you'll be pleased to have had them notice? And what difference would you hope that others noticing that about you might make to your relationship going forward? Or alternatively, we might choose to cooperate with the client's time frame, staying with their present focus, but inviting them to turn their attention to those elements of their present living which will fit with their preferred future. I can hear just how tough things have been for you, so tell me 10 things that you've been doing of late, however tiny, that have been helping you to keep yourself going in a way that is just right for you and for the people around you. When people become problem-dominated, one thing that is noticeable from their talking is a significant change in the direction of their gaze. Many people appear first to pay increasing attention to what's bothering them, and then perhaps to recall those events of the past that are congruent with the unhappy present, and finally to picture a future limited and determined by the current difficulties. Solution-focused practitioners invite people, and the word invite's important, to initiate the construction of an alternate history. So as you sit here today, finding life challenging, tell me about those times in the past when life has been tough for you and you found a way of coming through, of surviving, in a way that leaves you perhaps even a little proud of yourself. And what did those times tell you about the person that you can be at your best? We can then build on this by asking, and of those qualities that you have brought to mind, which of those would you like to see growing and becoming more central in the post-pandemic version of you? And then, and how might you know that those qualities are growing? And here is one last question, which I like asking. Solution Focus asks questions. So what have you noticed about yourself already as you've lived through this tough time that you would like to become a part of the new normal, the you that you would like to find yourself to be when COVID-19 is losing its grip over us? Never just back to normal. So, tough times need not limit our creativity. Tough times can be times when we can write new stories, when we can discover who we can be at our best, when we can notice kindness and courage and indeed heroism in those around us that will forever change the way that we see those people and live alongside them. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.